David, a very good morning to you and congratulations on the new role and the successful conclusion of the negotiations of the coalition.
Oh, good morning, Sean, and thank you.
Look, I want to talk first up about the job you've given yourself. Minister of Regulation. I'll be honest, to an outsider, it doesn't look that sexy. It's not like Foreign Affairs. It doesn't sound like it's got baubles. In fact, it's a whole new ministry. I thought about it, though. Regulation is used in this country often to implement quite serious change without the scrutiny of Parliament. And regulation and the use of regulation can be a very powerful political and policy tool, can't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I know being new, it does take a bit of going through, but I mean, let me just start with what's one of, if not our biggest problem. We're too poor. People say we've got a cost of living crisis. The truth is that every country's had inflation lately. What's different in New Zealand is that stuff was expensive and wages were low before inflation kicked off in the last few years. And then you've got to ask why that is. Well, some of it's education. That hasn't been going so well lately. Some of it's infrastructure. We know about that. Some of it's wasteful government spending. We were pretty keen to cut down on that. But another thing that I think has been overlooked is that we spend far too much time in compliance with rules, or we are stopped from doing productive things entirely because of rules, or our culture gets gradually dumbed down because we've seen too many people try and get knocked back before. That's where regulation comes in. And, you know, you hear the classics, people say, I'm a builder. It takes me longer to get consent to build something than actually build it. You talk to teachers, they say, all I wanted to do was open up kids' eyes to the world of knowledge. All I actually do is tick boxes for the Ministry of Education. Then you go into farming, you go into finance. Just about every sector has this problem. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we've got to change the way that politicians think about regulating at the moment. If there's a problem, you make a law.
You make a rule. You make a rule in the hope it will fix it. Yeah.
And the problem is that the other 5 million of us are stuck here trying to follow, you know, layers and layers of rules like sedimentary rock that's been built up by government after government. And my hope for this new position and this new ministry is that finally we'll have someone in government who, just like the Minister of Finance's job is to knock back wasteful spending, in theory at least, we'll have someone in government whose job it is to go through sectors like farming or finance or education or whatever and say there's a lot of rules here that don't make sense. We're going to create an omnibus bill to go through Parliament that will delete a bunch of them or change a bunch of them. And when new laws come along, we'll say, well, you got to ask and answer serious questions. What problem are we trying to solve? What are the costs? What are the benefits? Do they add up? Who wins? Who loses? What about property rights? And if we can get that kind of thinking embedded in government, then I think it will not only change our wealth, but actually change our culture over time, because we'll get back some of that can-do attitude that we believe we have.
All right. It sounds to me, as you envisage this role, that you will have the freedom to comment, to investigate any area of government, right? And make comment on regulation and rules in any field of government, from trade to foreign affairs to health to education. Really, you've got open slather on where you can take this.
Well, that's true, but it's not just commenting. It's actually got to be based on facts. It's got to be based on regulatory reviews where we might say, look, farming, you know, massively over-regulated. We basically go out, listen to farmers, say, well, what are the rules that annoy you the most? Go back to the ministry and say, well, look, do any of these actually make sense? Do they fit the standards of what good regulation is? And the ones that don't, we say, okay, well, we're going to prepare a law that's going to delete those. And then go to the minister responsible and say, hey, look, here's what's coming. We don't think you need these rules. But if you want to keep them, let's, speak now and tell us why. So it totally reverses the onus of, what it means to have regulations. Now, because at the moment they sort of happen by default. We want to flip it back to, if they don't make sense, they're gone, sector by sector. But of course, all of this, the whole government has to agree to it. You've got to get Cabinet to agree to a bill and so on. But at least someone is now actually taking that job in the opposite direction.
Look, I'm kind of loath to buy into the narrative that is being created, but I just don't think, given what I'm reading in the media and on social media, we've got to go there. This issue over the Public Interest General Fund and indeed the New Zealand On Air Fund, you have said that you want, and the coalition agreement says, that, government largesse should be handed out according to need and ethnicity should be taken out as a factor in making decisions. Before we get into the specifics of the Journalism Fund, we have arts funding, broadcasting funding or media funding in this country that does make specific provision for the creation of Māori programming and diversity programming according to ethnicity. Those things are written into the DNA of New Zealand On Air and various other cultural bodies which provide funding. Will those things go?
Well, the coalition agreement is that all things are funded on need rather than race. Obviously, now we've formed a government. The Cabinet's got to agree what the specific policies are in each area. But certainly my belief is that we've signed up to ensure that all public funding and all public services are delivered on the basis of need rather than race. Paul Goldsmith is the Minister for Arts, Cultural and Heritage, and I would hope that he would be taking not just the letter but the spirit of the coalition agreements. In fact, letter and the spirit are in the preamble to the coalition agreements, and ensuring that we do exactly that.
Could, therefore, New Zealand On Air expect a review? And we do note that one of its board members, Andy Shaw, has resigned after making highly politicised comments in his social media about the incoming government and what he thinks of it. And you cannot but imagine, David, that having had that person on the board of New Zealand On Air, which gives out hundreds of millions of dollars every year, that the organisation might have some problems.
Well, we're just lucky in a way that this guy was stupid enough to tell the world of his views straight away. Of course, we can't assume that anyone else there has similar views. However, I think it's going to be incumbent on the incoming government to make sure that the people that we appoint to any kind of entity like New Zealand On Air is someone who has the best interests of the public at heart rather than partisan political interests, and that any other people who are there with partisan political interests instead of the public interest moves on, because they're not serving the public if that's their view.
Well, how does John Campbell keep his job? You read his piece for TVNZ, didn't you? Said you were racist, you were recolonising.